right, welcome everybody back to the Living Streams Church podcast. Thankful that you guys are joining us. Thankful that we have stuff we know about the Lord, and we have the scriptures, and we have wisdom, and we have Mark Buckley here in the studio today, giving us that extra dose of wisdom, and Alec, who for some reason is still so young, but still so wise. Wisdom beyond his years, which is cool. It's not the hair. Yeah. Hair's supposed to give you strength, not wisdom. So I don't know where you're getting it from. Maybe it's the beard.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, I'm less young than I was.
Less young than you were. That's true.
You're older than Jesus when he was finished, right?
That's true.
How old are you now?
That's 35.
35 and 2 kids, which is like exponential aging right there. For sure.
I don't know.
Sure.
I feel a lot younger now.
Yeah. How old are you, Mark?
I just got to play on the train park
75.
yesterday.
You still saying it? You're not too worried about it?
You know what? It sounds older than it feels right now, which is a good thing.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank the Lord for healthy bodies, healthy minds.
I started preparing to be 80 when I was in my 20s.
Oh.
The way I'd make food choices and exercise choices, and now it's pretty close. So I'm pushing the date out a little.
Still prepping? No, that's amazing. That's food and exercise, right?
Yeah.
That's
90% those are the only things you can control.
Well, genetics.
Really. You can't control genetics and sleep. If I knew more about sleep in my 20s and 30s, I would have been better at that. You know, taking a nap and not always pushing to the extreme and thinking that you always just recoup all your energy, because you don't necessarily at the older you get. Have
you started preparing for your 80s, Alec?
I have.
You have?
Talking about this. Yeah, a little bit.
Oh, wow.
I mean, when we got pregnant with Silas and I was watching my dad's health where it was, I was thinking, and I was doing the math and realizing I'm about the same age my dad was when I was born.
Yeah.
And I thought, I want to be a grandpa.
And play with your grandkids someday.
Actually, the stuff you were saying on Sunday was really getting me a little bit. I was processing through a lot of that. Some of it a little bit too involving other people to share on podcasts, but which tends to be the case when we're talking about forgiveness, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But I was thinking about just the when you were talking about how hard it is to miss out on the blessing of your dad for your wife and kids, you know. Yeah. And that was a huge thing, because I have nieces and nephews who are, one of them's a young adult now, you know, so I got to see him be a grandpa with all his energy and all his life in him, and with his family intact and together and following Jesus. Yeah. And he was a powerful grandpa, you know, and I knew I was just scraping to get him to be able to be here to meet my kids, you know. And he met one, and the other one was still in my wife's womb when he passed, and it was hard to miss that, you know. But anyway, so I became very, very clear for me of like, I want to be a grandpa. I want to give that blessing. I want to be present for that. For sure.
So you're planning on 80 already. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. I remember always talking about 50. I remember you told me one time, I was like, I just want to make it to 50 without blowing up my family, without blowing up my life. That was kind of this thing. And part of it was because my dad, you know, was gone at 48. So it was like making it to 50. And actually one of my friends, we both were kind of like, let's just make it to 50. And you, I remember one time said to me, you're like, you keep saying 50. At some point, I want to talk to you about that. Like you were, I don't know, it hit you in a way that you were going, no, that's not right. That's not good. But it's been good for me. But the problem is I'm 47 now, so kind of need to start aiming a little beyond that probably.
Right. Yeah. Well, and it's so important, because time is the only unrenewable resource we've got, right? So the way, just like financial preparation, every financial planner will tell you that if you start saving in your 20s, the compound interest and the multiplication of your assets creates something much greater in your latter years. Well, the things we do to prepare ourselves, the disciplines we embrace in every way, whether it's the fasting or the exercise or the food choices like Daniel made, are really going to set the course of our health. And I've done small groups now for over 30 years with some of the same guys. And I've seen what's happened to the guys who don't embrace discipline versus the guys who do. Yeah. And it's like, you don't want to go, I told you 20 years ago.
Yeah.
You got to make some changes, but
well, the discipline, you use the word discipline, and that really is a bit of what we're talking about in this season at Living Streams with our prayer and fasting season. It's prayer and fasting that we highlight. It's prayer that we dive into. Fasting is a discipline that historically and even like scientifically, it seems to help our prayer life. So it's not fasting. It isn't really an end at all. It's a means, and prayer really is the end. We're trying to use these disciplines to get us, more into a space where we can encounter God through prayer, hear God, speak to God, receive from God, be with God, all of those things. And so we're doing that, the prayer and fasting season. But over the past, number of years, we've added to our prayer and fasting season just an introduction to even other disciplines,
Right. Which I think is really good.
Yeah, fasting being one of those things, prayer being one of those things. But then, I know we've talked a lot about Sabbath over time. Last year, we actually looked at Jesus in the wilderness specifically and said, here he's in the wilderness preparing for ministry. So what are the things that he did? And scripture memorization, right, is part of what he was doing there. Definitely some fasting. So we kind of looked at that, and then this last Sunday in the message, we talked about Dallas Willard has a list, and on that list is so interesting. It's frugality was one of the disciplines, and you mentioned
you've got that. Ask anybody on your staff.
I think you both got that.
Oh gosh, don't talk to my family.
Yes, David probably.
They call it something else besides frugality. But you talk about the discipline now, can lead to, and that's been true of you and Christina and the mark of your life. You guys weren't well off when you started out in ministry, and
no, we weren't.
And you had to practice not only frugality but generosity when there wasn't much. And it's really been a beautiful testimony to all of us who've watched you and Christina, as well as the whole church and all of that, to see how the Lord has honored that and provided for that. And now you're in a place where you're continuing to be frugal and generous, but, with
both.
greater
It's
means.
Both in. It's not prosper so that you can be indulgent. It's by the grace of God, prosper so you can be more generous.
Yeah.
Because you don't get a reward for what you consume, but only for what you give.
Yeah. And I know, Alec, I've watched you just kind of grow into a man in a lot of ways, and you're not working at Coco's anymore.
No.
But even then, it seems like you've really tried to embrace that, and especially you've told stories of coming from a family where there wasn't much. I mean, living on the provision of the Lord in pretty dramatic ways, which was beautiful to see sometimes, but also hard to see sometimes. And now you're practicing that with your own family. So frugality, I thought that was interesting. And then I know Sabbath has been such a big deal. We actually talked about that in the podcast last week. But you're somebody that Mark has really learned to practice Sabbath almost as a lifeline to keep you mentally healthy and physically.
I really, because I love to work out, but I really think it's important for your body to take a true Sabbath every week where you're not pushing yourself physically. And every time I think, I don't want to be under the law and I just go ahead and do whatever, I usually pay for it. In my knee or in my back or in my elbow or something. It's like just as a reminder of, you know what, I really need this.
Yeah, the body, the rhythms of grace, right?
Yes.
The rhythms of God's grace, they're built in, and you either go with them and find the blessing, or you go against them and
you get the consequences.
It's like God knew something about the world and people which He made.
Yeah,
and His commandments seem to maybe align with the realities.
Yeah, for sure. The realities, the commandments, the realities. Your dad.
Yeah, that's what my dad would teach you, the 10 realities.
Yeah, that was such a good thing.
I love that.
I loved his example was always, you're driving this big truck down the freeway, and your truck is 18 feet tall.
Yeah.
And you're coming up to a sign that says, hey, low bridge, 17 feet tall. And you're like, whoa.
You're with somebody.
And he's like, how do they know, like what I can do and what I can't do?
I don't see any police.
And then they're like, this sign, who put this sign up? Like, do they really care, or can they be trusted? How long ago was this sign put up? And, this, and all these different type of things. And it's not a commandment. in the sense of a suggestion. It's a commandment in the sense that it's a reality.
Yeah.
If you keep going, a foot of your truck is going to be gone.
Yeah.
You know? So I love that God gives us these commandments, which are more than that. They're realities that either are going to cause grace to flow in your life or cause you to really be cramped up.
I loved it. It was so interesting what Mark had said about compound interest, because I'm rereading. I'm prepping for this week's sermon on Lead Us Not Into Temptation, and actually one of the go-to books that I recommend for people who are really struggling with temptation or pornography or any sort of perpetual addiction habit type thing like that is actually not even a Christian book. It's Atomic Habits. Have you guys read that book?
No.
Mark, you would love that book. It's one of those books of how did CJ put it in December? Like when science catches up to the Bible.
Yeah.
Where it's like this is
Confirms
basically the book of
truth,
Proverbs written by a guy 3 years ago. Or I think maybe 6 or 7 years ago, but it's all about how do you build good habits and break bad habits. And one of the things he says is that habits are the compound interest of your life. Using the exact metaphor you just did of like these things pay off significantly. What your habit is, what your ritual is, what your routine is. He talks about how like the cleanliness or messiness of your house is downstream from your cleaning habits.
Right.
Like if you have a habit of, I wake up, I empty the dishwasher, then you come home to an empty dishwasher. If you don't have a habit, you have a habit of loading up dirty dishes in the sink, well, then you have a messy sink,
Now you're getting very personal.
Yeah. And it's
David
true
and
of
I do not have anything to say about it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And it's every bit as true of our spiritual life as it is the state of our kitchen, like, do I have a habit of connecting with the Lord? Do I have a habit of going to the Lord when I'm angry or frustrated or rejected? Like, what are those rhythms? What are those habits? And who I am is a function of those disciplines, of those practices in a lot of ways, and who I'm becoming is a function of that. At least a big portion of who
That's
I am.
a really good word. That's a really, really good word.
Yeah. Well, one of the practices, that we have been studying on Sunday, the practice of prayer, and Jesus taught us the Lord's Prayer. And this Sunday, we were focusing on the section that says, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And forgiveness really being a practice, that Jesus is saying, when you pray, which hopefully is a daily thing, yes, recognize that God is your Abba, He is your Father. Recognize that His name is holy and hallowed. Recognize that there's always a challenge between His will and your will, that you don't wake up and have your will in line with Him. It's just always a battle. But then He says, give us this day our daily bread, because every day we need to eat. And so it's okay to come to the Father with that. But then it's almost like He's saying, and every day you're going to need to forgive. Every time you pray, you need to forgive. Every day you need to forgive, which sounds maybe a little dramatic or something, but the more you experience your own relationship with the Lord, the more you realize how you fall short every single day of His glory. So you need forgiveness every single day. And if you need forgiveness every single day, most likely the people that you're living with, working with, interacting with, driving on the freeway with, they need forgiveness every day as well. And so this time around, I just never really thought about how such a daily, it's a practice. Forgiveness is a practice. Forgiving others as we've been forgiven. In the New Testament, the rest of not in Jesus' teachings, but the rest of the New Testament, it's just so nonchalant. Every time it's forgive as you've been forgiven. Forgive, it's almost like breathing. Forgive as you've been forgiven. And so it just really has hit me that it is a practice. Forgiveness is not just something that happens once or twice in your life when the big thing happens, but it's a practice that will have compound interest, that will have compound blessing or compound complications based on how you do forgiveness.
So I want to make a parallel between forgiveness and grief for a minute. If you lose somebody or something happens where you grieve, it's very legitimate for a believer to grieve deeply, to weep deeply. And if somebody doesn't grieve appropriately and significantly enough, if they just want to get past it, I don't want to think about, then there's no redemptive value in that pain. There is redemptive value in grief, as painful as it is, because it transforms us. It tenderizes our hearts in the same way that a fast can tenderize our heart, because we need the comfort of the Holy Spirit to fill us because we've had a lack of food. Well, we need the comfort of the Holy Spirit. As Jesus said, blessed are those who mourn. And forgiveness also has to be totally grasped. I mean, the pain of what happened to us, like you were talking about Sunday, there's different levels to it, and you have to embrace it fully so that you can process it completely and then let it go. Because in the Greek, the forgiveness really means letting go. And you can't really let go of something that you don't even grasp what the heck happened. You just want to forget. We want to push it away. That's our natural reaction.
Yeah, I think one of the things you had said, kind of what you were talking about on Sunday, and what you're referring to was me forgiving my dad, who took his life, when I was 20 years old, and then the layers that I had to forgive him, not only for what he had done to me in leaving in that way, but also then watching my mom grieve over the next few years and having to forgive him for what he did to my mom, and then fast forwarding even 20 years and realizing that I needed to forgive him for leaving my wife hanging, because he wasn't there for her. And then our daughters, I have 3 daughters, and they would have loved to experience, a time with Billy, right?
Yes.
Like the adventure, go on an adventure with him. And so there was a loss there. And so there's multiple forgiving. Not only do I have to forgive somebody every day, but I might have to forgive the same person or the same situation season per season. And again, I don't think we're saying you need to bring these things up all the time. It's as they come up, right?
Yes.
It's not, I loved what Tim Keller said. It's not, forgiveness is where I'm not bringing this up anymore to myself or to you or to someone else. That's what I'm choosing to do. I'm letting this go. But there's times because of grief, because of the way our souls are wired, where this stuff comes up again, and forgiveness needs to be extended again.
And obviously, when you say not bringing it up in a negative way to use it against the name of the person, the reputation of the person.
And I think there's something deeper and internal, like you said, to yourself. But it's like, to me, that's a helpful slice of the pie of talking about forgiveness. But forgiveness is one of those things that is just so deep and so broad and so ever present that there's not a metaphor that does it justice, because I hear that and I'm like, oh, that's so good, but also it falls so short, because there's a lot more than not bringing it up to myself. I feel like, where there's like, okay, I think the biggest part is that release, is that sense of release of debt, which I love the fact that what we have is the word debt, and it is from, I mean, you were saying the same thing on in your sermon on Sunday, but it's got a connotation of sin. It's almost a euphemism for sin, the way they would use the word debt then. So it is really clearly saying sin, but sin is also with this weight of I think acknowledging what it is to forgive someone, right? Like there is a parallel. When you forgive someone, there is, like you're saying, Mark, an acknowledgement of the wrong and a release of what they owe you. And when you don't forgive someone, let me say, when I don't forgive someone, there's a part of me that's wanting them to hurt for what they've done to me. Yeah. I want them, and
you want to punish them.
Yeah, and we have that eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth sense, which is actually right. You know what I mean? That's in the Mosaic law, like eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. And we think, you hurt me, I want you to hurt. Yeah. And what we want is for the person to hear it, to say it, to acknowledge it, and then we want to give them what they gave us. And when we forgive them, we're releasing them of that. Yeah. And which is interesting, because we may not even have the power to make them to have our vengeance, right? To make them feel the hurt, but we're releasing them of our claim to their hurt.
Well, and doing what Jesus did for us. Jesus, I hurt you, and you responded with grace. Yeah, you responded with forgiveness and release. And so teach my heart. Yep. That like you said, does not want to. It is so contrary. I loved one of the things I read. It said, basically forgiveness is inhuman. Is kind of what he was saying. It's like it's not normal to human
nature,
reality.
Yeah.
Like it is contrary to our nature.
Yeah.
And so we are trying to practice into something and learn something. But we also, I mean, there's no doubt about it that in a lot of situations, we need the power of the Holy Spirit to actually help us do this. It's not something that we can even do on our own, especially in some of those painful situations. But.
So when people hear the word forgiveness from the pulpit, like in your sermon, my guess is that for most of us, there is a name that comes to us. There is a person.
Just one?
Well, I mean...
You don't have a list?
There's a primary oftentimes. And I've tried to think about this because we had a guy in our church that we worked very closely with, tried to help a lot and did help a lot, and he ended up ripping off people financially. Right. And he didn't rip me off financially. He caused me pain in other ways. But I was thinking, why is it that this guy has been so hard for me to forgive? Now, part of it is I have a fiduciary responsibility to the church to protect the sheep from people that would...
From wolves. Yeah.
Wolves, yeah. Swindlers, specifically. But there's another part of it, too, because I've realized that part of the damage that was done is that when businessmen in a church get taken advantage of financially by somebody in the church, they have a less generous heart towards the church because it's caused them a wound.
Yeah.
And so it's really done damage.
Yeah.
And it's not just a personal thing. And I've had to sort of unpack the layers in terms of and this person did some stuff to me too, but if I don't forgive them for what he did to me, then what I'm really saying is I'm still stuck in the pain of that moment, and there's no redemptive value in that experience.
Yeah.
And truly, I haven't been forgiven because I haven't been able to process it. I'm stuck. We only can process it when we let it go, trust God, and then the pain has a purpose.
You mentioned the word wound. I was actually thinking, question for both of you guys. All of our fathers have passed away.
Right.
And you always hear about the father wound, right? Like everyone has hopefully a father's blessing. That's the goal. But because our fathers are not perfect, there's wounding
father
as
wound
well.
too.
So father wounding, father blessing, both of those things. And I kind of shared a bit of my father wound and how I've had to process layers of forgiveness, and just wanted to know if you don't have to share, but have you guys worked through a little bit of your own father wound? Would you be willing to share? Okay, this is a bit of where the blessing, but then this was some of the hard stuff that I've had to work forgiveness. And the reason I'm asking that is, one, I think it will be helpful for people who are listening, who maybe first time they're hearing, oh, wait a second, maybe my father wound is why I am the way I am, and I need to go through forgiveness. But all of us know that we love our kids so dearly. We would do anything for them. We are trying to bless them, but guess what? We know they're going to have to someday sit on a podcast and talk about
My kids have had to go to therapy.
Talk about the wounding we've done, or my dad always did.
Yeah.
And hopefully they'll have grace for us. And so we're not at all trying to say we're perfect.
Right.
But again, just to try and help people as they're working through their own wounds that they
because it says in Hebrews 12 that everybody receives discipline from their father because they're loved. Now, that discipline can be very imperfect.
Yeah.
So for me, I remember being 21 years old in a discipleship house one night, and I had these incredible stomach pains, and I thought I had been poisoned because this kid that I had picked up for a job at our Christian farm had been carrying a dead pig before he got in my truck, a pig that died of some swine flu kind of thing. And then he came to work with me with a bunch of other guys on the farm. And then he was the guy that I asked to make lunches, and without even thinking, And now
I just love little glimpses into your hippie world. It's just so fun to be like, oh yeah.
I used to buy the guys great big lunches, and because I didn't pay them much, and they'd work better if they ate good. So this, and I'm thinking, somebody said, well, didn't you bless the food? If you blessed the food, it should have been fine. And I'm like, yeah, but I said the blessing, and I remembered that he was carrying the pig. I had no faith, so it didn't work. But so that night, as I prayed, I realized this isn't poison. This is a deliverance I'm going through. And the key to that deliverance was I needed to forgive my dad.
Oh,
now,
really?
Don't ask me how it's all connected, but sometimes when you're in a crisis and in pain, things come back to your mind. You start digging deep of things that are buried. And basically, I just accepted my dad for who he was a very loving, gracious guy, but he was completely absent from the time I was 16 emotionally. He was an adulterer, and he had other relationships, and he wasn't, it's like, Mark, you'll do great. God bless. Go do what you want to do. And so he wasn't there to help me process the trials of being a young man. And I made some really bad choices, and I needed to forgive him for not being there to actually provide some of the discipline and guidance that I really needed.
Yeah. What about you, Alec?
I think there's father wound there. It's a unique situation in part because my dad was a really good dad. Mm-hmm. And by the time I could see his shortcomings, I knew where they came from. Mm-hmm. So in particular, like of all the shortcomings of my dad as a father, the biggest one was he didn't know how to be a friend, right? So I remember listening to Jared Utterback talk about him and his dad. And, Jared was living here at the time, and his dad is back in the Bay Area, actually old friends with Mark, right? Or at least part of Open Door.
Bruce Utterback?
So did I say Utterback?
Oh,
Riley.
Jared Riley.
Riley.
Jared Riley. Yeah.
And how they would call a couple times a week. Jared was in his mid-30s at the time and still calling his dad his dad was his best friend. Mm-hmm. Remember hearing him talk about that.
That's a beautiful thing, isn't it?
And my heart sinking because I love my dad. My dad loves me. My dad was my greatest teacher. Mm-hmm. But rare moments of friendship. Not because he was distant. Yeah. But by the time I was able to piece that together, I knew his upbringing. He was one of 7 kids and the only one who was abused and brutally abused. Lock him in the basement. Don't tell anybody he's down there until the bruises are gone kind of abuse. Because my grandpa simply did not like my dad. Almost worse that he didn't really abuse any of my dad's siblings like that at all. And so he grew up without a dad who was a friend. And he actually grew up not knowing how to have friends. His best friends were teachers like him. And so they would, Danny Benguigui at my dad's memorial shared about or he wrote a letter because he was out of town, but shared about this road trip they took where they just taught each other about Hebrew halfway across the country. And it was the best week of both of their lives. But anybody who wasn't that, he didn't know how to, he wasn't crack open a cold one kind of guy. He just didn't know how to do that because he literally never learned how to have a friend. And so by the time I was realizing that was a hole, I knew where it came from. And I just, and my dad is so gentle and loving and kind. I was never angry at him, and I had people like David and Mike who were good friends, who showed me what a father friend can be, So, it's almost like the Lord did a lot there before I knew.
Yeah. The Lord's very good to provide, where the shortcomings are. He's so faithful. And I mean, I can pass that same thing on to Mark. I mean, my dad stepped out and Mark, even though you were living in Arizona and I was living in Oregon, you cared about me. You wanted to make sure that I had whatever I needed, and actually ended up recruiting me into ministry and providing a place for me. And you and Christina both have been awesome in that regard. So the Lord does provide, but I love what you're saying. And in your situation, it wasn't hard for you to release your dad in that regard. And I feel the same way. I mean, my dad, because of all the blessing, like when I think back about my dad, I just have happy memories for the most part, grateful memories. And I was 20 years old, so I was mostly grown, or at least developed in a lot of way up to that point. And the Lord he gave me, the Jason Beals, the Jim Wrights, all these guys to kind of step in that absence, which is awesome. But
well, you're mentioning, Alec, too, a really important point, and that is, it really helps when we think about the origins of our dads or our moms. I know David's dad's dad. I knew him, and he wasn't the kind of guy that had friends he could process with. He was a military guy.
Air Force colonel.
He was a regimented colonel, and he was moved around a lot. And the Army does not produce an environment that is conducive to friendship, really. It's more taking orders. And you get raised in that environment, then it's hard to pass on something. And David's dad's primary weakness to me was he was so brilliant that he didn't process with his friends. He had friends, but he didn't process with them. He processed only in his own mind. And when he came to a decision, that was it. And we need one another because there's a wisdom in the multitude of counselors.
I think I've thought a lot about exactly what we were talking about the last year because for me, what was beautiful was that was a few years ago. I was processing through the stuff I was just sharing, but then the last few years of my dad's life, I had that awareness, and the hard thing, but a good and a sweet thing that the Lord is calling me to show him friendship.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was hard. He didn't learn something. He was at the end of his life. He was an old dog who didn't get new tricks, but I got to learn how to pursue him as a friend. And so I don't know, actually maybe it was a long lesson, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, I started just saying, hey, Dad, we're going to watch a TV show tonight, No, I guess maybe 10 years ago because I was still living with them maybe, but no, even longer. I don't know. It was around the beginning of that time.
You began to initiate.
Doesn't matter. Yeah. And so in the last couple of years, especially, it was me carrying that, knowing my dad does not know how to befriend. I'm going to pursue that. But one of the things in the last, 3, 4, 5 years was really huge for me was learning about honor, which was a big deal for my dad. And I come to realize that in the commandment to honor your father and mother, that it may go well with you all the days of your life. I think exactly what you're saying, Mark, is a key element of that. Is really important. When you honor someone, you actually care about the perspective. You put their lens on for a little bit. And I think when everybody in our society understands that a big key to who you are is how your parents messed you up, right? And yet we can see it get so unhealthy, right? Yeah. Like I know lots of people, and there are people in, well, frankly, my siblings, is the way they've processed the shortcomings of my parents has been in a way that wasn't with honor. And it's been pretty destructive for them. Right. And when you don't honor them, all you see is their shortcomings and their failures, and you're not asking yourself anything about where that came from. And the result is you get angry and bitter, and you don't realize yourself doing the exact same things or something worse, or swinging the pendulum way too far the other way. When you honor your parents as you process their shortcomings, you treat them gently and kindly with the minimum necessary shame as you process those things, and you see where it came from. And as you see where it comes from, you understand it, and you're less likely to repeat it. So I look at my dad and I say, oh, okay, I see that he didn't know. I'm not just angry that he didn't know how to be my friend. I see why he didn't know how to be my friend, because he had a dad who didn't know how to do that. Yeah. And now all of a sudden I'm acutely aware, wait a minute, I had a dad who didn't know how to be my friend. My dad didn't beat me. He was one most gentle man I've ever met. He learned a lot from the Lord in that regard, but here was a blind spot that he never worked through with the Lord. And he worked through 1,000 way more important ones. Yeah. And so now I'm at risk to do the same with my son. So I look to the men in my life who know how to do that. And I tell my wife, whose dad does not have that shortcoming. He's not a follower of the Lord, but he's a good friend to his kids and good at playing with them, good hanging out. And I say, you hold me accountable to be like your dad in this regard.
I love that too, because you think about Jesus on the cross. When he extended forgiveness, he said, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. He was able to kind of not just focus on what they were doing to him, but basically their perspective or where they're coming from, and you can almost say it was like, Father, forgive them because they don't have a good daddy like I've had. Like they don't know you like I know you.
Right.
If they knew you like I knew you, they wouldn't be doing this. Right. He was sympathizing, even though they were the ones like crucifying. I mean, it's just mind-boggling. He was saying they don't know what they're doing, and to be able to get to that point, it does sometimes, I think, take the empowering of the Holy Spirit, because the hurt can be so much, the grief can be so much, the anger can be so much, the injustice can be so like resounding that you can't even, like, it's just ringing in your ear. But I think the breakthrough comes is when you realize, hey, at the end of the day, this is a messed up person like me, and maybe they were messed up. I mean, Joel Fritz, my cousin, you guys know Joel Fritz. He used to be a pastor at Living Streams, but he always talks about his dad was the one that built the dam. So his dad's dad was beaten by his dad's dad, was brutalized by his dad's dad, and abused, and it's just been this long
generational
stream of just evil that's come down on them. And then Joel talks about his dad, who every once in a while would act a little weird or a little crazy or this or that. And the way Joel described it was like this nasty river of abuse and hatred and kind of father wounds was coming down, and his dad was trying to stop it so his 3 boys didn't feel it. But every once in a while a little splash would come over, and Joel would be like, ew, what is that? And he'd be like, good. But then once he realized as he grew up what his dad was trying to stop from going to the next generation, it was like immediately Joel saw his dad in a completely different way. It was so easy to say, I forgive you for anything, Dad, because of what I've seen that you have been saving us from. And I don't know, it's just a beautiful, beautiful picture of forgiveness.
I wanted to say, when you're talking about, what Jesus said, forgive them for they don't know what they do. I think one of the more profound things that I guess encounters with forgiveness that I had years ago in early adulthood, early 20s, maybe even late teens, I was processing through. At that time, I had a pretty strong relationship with my sister, and I was processing through some big, just some big ones, some big hurts in that relationship. 'Cause that's when you say a name. To be honest, I mean those are. It's not my dad, but my sister's among the ones that it's like, oh, there's a lot of ache there, right? And even at that point in time, right, which is pretty normal, right? Siblings, we have a tendency, right? There's the small ones,
rough on each other.
Yeah, there's the small ones and the constant ones and the little, and then there's the big ones that come, And when I was in junior high, my sister, who's 9 years older than me, really important, who I love very dearly, tried to take her own life, And similar to what you're saying with your dad, who did do that, it's like you don't realize all of the offenses right away, especially initially. You're dealing with the grief or the, in my case, the relief that didn't happen, and the grief of what almost was, and then you're so concerned for the person who almost took their life, and then in the wake of it, months or years later, you're angry. Because you're like, how dare you try to take you from me, And you start to realize, and then you realize that's not obvious to the person. It was on the back end of someone who unsuccessfully tried to take their life. You see them as a victim, which they are in a lot of ways, but then you don't realize how much they're a perpetrator. And you don't feel the freedom to discuss that. So years down the road, almost probably about around 10 years or so later, maybe not quite, I was acutely aware of that. I'd been acutely aware of it for a few years, of all what you had done in that moment to me, and some other more recent things that were kind of medium-sized offenses. And the thing about my sister is she's not someone who will say I'm sorry often. And I'm someone who really needs to hear I'm sorry, And I was feeling the Lord raising these offenses to the surface for me, saying, hey, you need to work on forgiving your sister. And I was thinking, well, how's that going to work? Like, I'm going to sit down, she's not going to say sorry. And I felt like the Lord said, I don't want you to tell your sister about this list of 3, 4, 5 big offenses until you have forgiven her.
Yeah.
And I don't want you to talk to her about them unless you can say, this is from a place of helping you grow and not from a place of you hearing what you did to me. And so I spent 3, 4, 5 months wrestling with the Lord. The primary thing that I was dealing with the Lord was trying to forgive her before I was able to actually say, okay, let me sit down and I actually can share these things. And it's so that you know that this is a big deal for other people moving forward, but I really have released you. And a big part of that was the Lord saying, was the moment, the kind of a breakthrough in that few months process was the moment I was talking to the Lord, and I was saying, how can I forgive her if she doesn't even think what she did was wrong? And he said, oh, you don't even know the things I've forgiven you of that you don't think were wrong.
Right.
And didn't I forgive you while you were still a sinner? Didn't I say forgive you for you know not what you do? And I realized, oh, I need to forgive her on his strength and his power and his capacity in the way he does. And I've come to realize, I think part of it is parents do a really good thing when two siblings or two friends hurt each other's feelings, do something wrong, and you say, hey, Johnny, go tell Susie you're sorry. Johnny says, I'm sorry. And then you say, hey, Susie, go tell Johnny you forgive him, and that's the reconciliation. That's a great model for that. But unfortunately, the accidental lesson that gets learned is that forgiveness must be preceded by an apology.
So we both know, or we all know, that sometimes Jesus said, like in Luke, if somebody sins against you, rebuke them. If they repent, forgive them. And then in other times, like in Matthew, he doesn't say rebuke them. So what is it? Well, to me, that's the Holy Spirit that needs to show us. Sometimes the appropriate thing is to challenge the person directly, give them a rebuke, and let them own up to it. And other times, the only way you're going to get the breakthrough is if you do exactly what you said, is I need to forgive first because they're completely oblivious. You challenge them, it's only going to make the situation worse because she did not do what she did because of you in any way, shape, or form. And it's going to be really hard for her to understand how you would be offended on something that was so personal to her that it wanted,
Yeah.
And to me, suicide is the ultimate thing of the person not really intending to have the impact that they're having. Because the impact is...
Well, that's just a perfect example of sin, though. Like, you get to choose your own sin, but you don't get to choose the consequence.
Right. For yourself or with everybody else.
And you just... that's why sin is so deadly.
Yeah.
So deadly. I love that, Alec. And I just... Getting that other person's perspective is so good. But you're right. I think in the end, what Tim Keller said was forgiveness is given before it's felt. And it is sticking your toe in the water, right? It's like those priests who were crossing the Jordan River. You step into forgiveness, and then the Lord does something unique. Yeah. But He does ask us to release. He does ask us to. That one of the things I was reading was that forgiveness is a one person situation, whereas reconciliation takes two people. Because that's where you're saying if you say to someone, "Hey, you hurt me in this," and they respond and say, "Oh, I'm sorry," then you can have reconciliation.
Right.
But that's not forgiveness. Forgiveness is releasing someone whether they are repentant or not. It's something that God calls us to do. And I love that Jesus right in that prayer, right? He's saying, hey, do this whenever you pray because you're going to need to practice this in little
all
things
the time.
because
all
of
the
big
time.
things. And Tom Parker, you guys know Tom Parker, but he was one of my professors of Hebrew and Greek way back when. But he used to talk about how we should pursue small embarrassments. And what he was saying is like, keep those accounts really small. Like, don't wait until something gets big before you actually speak about it.
Right.
Do it when it's small and when it's fresh and when it doesn't have a chance to grow and become this massive thing. And I think that's what a little bit Jesus is getting at with this rhythm of forgiveness. Like, forgive as you've been forgiven. There's always reason to forgive because you've been forgiven. And you're going to need to do it a lot. And you're going to need to do it often. You're going to need to get good at it because every once in a while, it's going to be so difficult.
So many years ago, this was like 79 or 80, there was a lady who had let us use her place in Tahoe a few times for vacations, and our families went up there together and stuff. And she came to me and she wanted to borrow $3,000. Well, I didn't really have $3,000, but I asked my brother, Robert, if he would lend her $3,000, and he said, "I won't lend her $3,000. I'll lend you $3,000." And I'm like,
he's smart.
Yeah, he was smart. He's a banker, And I'm like, so anyway, long story
like, okay,
short,
great.
she literally said that, "Here, I'll sign over the deed to my condo to you, and you can keep it until I pay you back." And I'm like, no, I trust you. Right. And sure enough.
Because you're not a banker.
Right.
Yeah.
That was another dumb thing. The other dumb thing was that Christina said, "No, we can't do that, because if she doesn't pay us back, the only money we have is money that people in the church had given us to make our mortgage payments." Some people got together and raised $10,000 that enabled me to give it to a savings and loan officer who gave us a loan, because I didn't make enough money to qualify for a loan. So anyway, she never pays us back. And then later on, another guy wanted to borrow $500, and he worked with me. I knew him. I trusted him. He wanted to give me his Martin guitar, which was worth more than that. So those amounts don't sound that much, but in those days, 3,000 is like 30,000 today. Mm-hmm. When you're a young dad with little kids and on a pastor's salary of under 3,000, it was a lot. Anyway, I got burned twice. Both times I didn't listen to Christina, but it changed our life because I made a commitment. Since it's not my money, it's our money. Whatever major financial decisions we make, we will make together. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Because she's the one keeping track of things. It's going to hurt her as much as it hurts me.
Has Christina had to forgive you sometimes?
But here's the thing. Let's say I didn't forgive that lady, I think it would have robbed me of all the joys that we had in Tahoe using her place. It would have robbed my marriage of the joy of us being in unity together, because I'd be just focused on how she wronged me. Yeah. She didn't keep her word.
Yeah, I think the debts thing is such an interesting concept, especially in today, forgive us our debts. Yeah. Where, we can hopefully try and understand what Jesus was talking about in that day. And I mean, there was like indentured servants, there was servitude. I mean, basically everyone was in debt to the Roman Empire somehow in some way with taxes and all those things. And so money, the people Jesus is talking to, using the word debts, I mean, they knew, like, if guy owed me $20 and he didn't give me my $20 back, like, he could sink my whole family, right, or whatever. So I think that was a factor. And then you think about today, sad to say, but in America, I mean, everyone's in debt. Like the actual financial debt reality of a credit card debt, whatever it is, it's just unbelievable. What we've allowed to happen to our society, and so I think that the word debt, besides just the sin and the wounding and the offense and all of those things, has a real big reality. I know that the Lord's challenging me in something right now where there's somebody that owes me some money, it's like, okay, Lord. This is the challenge I feel like that the Lord's putting on my heart for this specific situation. So don't take this as general in every one of your situations. But in this one, I sense the Lord in this prayer time kind of saying, hey, I want you to release them of that debt and see how I'm going to, take care of it. And in some ways, it's like I have a decision. Do I want to hold this person, to say, hey, you need to give me this amount of money, or do I want to say, I release you and I'm going to let the Lord decide how he wants to handle it? And again, this is not me saying because God's going to give me more money or whatever, but he will give me something much better. If he's leading me in this direction, he will give me something much better than anything this person could give me back, right, even if they paid me back with interest or something, which there's no interest on that. So it's just interesting. There's just this tug of war. Even though I'm teaching on this, even though I'm doing, it's like, okay, I need to let this go. But even then, that's a decision that's not just for me. It's a decision for my wife and I to decide together. Yes. Because it's like, okay, well, this is ours. Everything we have is ours. So, but I feel like the Lord's saying, let this go, so that your hand will be open for what I have to put in it. And so it's a trust exercise, but it is forgiveness also, even though it's a debt and it's a financial reality.
It is a real.
And I feel like the Lord's doing something with debt this year. I've said that on Sunday too, that in some ways, the whatever investment we make in the debt reality of our lives financially, he's going to breathe on it and multiply it and bless it in some way.
Well, I want to say something else about the money too, because a lot of people are owed money by different people. I know I am. I have a number of people, pastors that owe me money, right?
Oh, those pastors.
And it's not like I'm going to be hurt if I don't get it, but it's going to hurt them if they don't give it. You know why? Because I'm not going to help them anymore in that way. Now, I can forgive them. I can let go of it. But they're teaching me. See, Jesus said regarding money, if you're not faithful in unrighteous mammon, who will give you the true riches? Yeah. We need, if you owe money, anybody listening, to anybody, pay them up. Just do it. Even if it's $5 a week or a month or whatever, start keeping your word, and God will honor it and multiply it and bless it because it will affect your relationships. It's a trust thing, and the Lord uses that. And so for us, we have to let it go because otherwise then we lose all benefit.
Well, that's what Jesus followed up the teaching on the prayer. He said the whole Lord's Prayer, and then the very next thing in the Sermon on the Mount was he said, let me clarify on forgiveness. And it basically saying, if you do not forgive, then your Father will not forgive you. And it's as if like, look, this is actually going to affect your prayer life. This is going to affect your relationship with God if you are not, forgiving and letting go, just as the Lord forgave you. And I think that does apply too, to where we're saying, Lord, I want to forgive these who owe me, but Lord, forgive us our debts. Because when we sign up and we're in debt financially, we're making a contract with our word, with our integrity. And so if we have all of these outstanding debts that we're either ignoring or not, trying to make good on, then in some ways we're not being people of our word. And I think it does affect, the idea of you can only serve, one master. So you can either serve God or mammon. I think there's people that are getting themselves into debt or not handling debt, and they don't realize that they're slaves to that. Even though they want to be free to serve God, it's like they have to serve mammon. And I think God, that's what I'm praying this year, that a lot of people will be able to get free. The captives will be set free by asking the Lord to help them, get their debts forgiven or paid off or whatever they are.
I had one last thought I have towards it, which I think we might have danced around this a little bit, but it's really important to realize that we have this capacity to go to the Lord to help us with this. I love that the man who said to Jesus, I believe, help my unbelief. And Jesus basically said, hey, everybody, did you see that?
Yeah.
What a big deal that was. I have always linked that so closely with forgiveness, the capacity to go in prayer and say, Jesus, I forgive, help my unforgiveness. Because I think it's, in fact, I was just hearing from someone in our church today who was saying when we were talking about forgiveness a couple of years ago, there was a message where the call was, hey, to forgive, but if you can't forgive, it's because you're trying it in your own strength, and not the Lord's strength. And the truth is, there are some forgivenesses that are possible naturally, right? Like if you owe me $5, I have the strength to forgive you $5. If you lied to me about a little thing, I am strong enough to forgive you about a little lie, But we've all experienced
behind my back.
But we've all experienced deep wounds that are beyond our capacity to forgive. And I think, there's countless examples, but I think of a beautiful video of a man a few years back whose brother, Botham was his name. I don't remember the guy's name, but his brother had been mistakenly shot by a woman who came home who was an off-duty police officer. She entered the wrong apartment, thought it was hers. She was on floor 3.
Oh my goodness.
But the guy's was on floor 2. She walked in, saw a large guy in the room, and pulled out her gun and
killed him.
And in her court case, his brother, against the wishes of the rest of the family and the whole community, and obviously this is huge and in the news, he said, I forgive you because Botham would forgive you and because Botham would want you to know Jesus. And I hope you know Jesus has forgiven you too. And he asked the judge if he could go give her a hug, and they wept together.
Gosh.
And it's just powerful story. And
It was an honest mistake.
Well, and forget, but at the time, who knows, because of course the internet was saying, because she was white, he was black, the internet was making a whole thing of it, and people railed against that man for forgiving her, and his own family was unhappy with it. And I just thought, this man did not have that strength. This man did not. He found that in Jesus, and he said as much, that is not natural. That is as supernatural as watching someone get out of their wheelchair and walk, is to see someone forgive the murderer of their brother, under any circumstances. And, what you asked at resources, one, it's a little bit weird because of the way his life and ministry is, but Desmond Tutu and his daughter Mfo have a book called The Book of Forgiving.
Well, they did the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa to heal those wounds.
Oh, they've got
if you're
stuff
willing
to
to tell the truth, you can be forgiven.
But the Book of Forgiving is very practical. He writes it for a Christian and or non-Christian audience, because that's a big part of his life and ministry, is trying to sow Jesus into parts of the world and people who aren't following Jesus even. But that book is powerful. They talk about her walking through the murder of someone that was essentially an adopted family member in their house. They came home and found that person brutally murdered. I think her kids found the person murdered in their own home, and the forgiveness and knowing the offender. And
so, the people we're closest to hurt us the most, right? And if you love somebody in your family, whether it's your marriage or your kids or whatever, you're willing to forgive a lot. And you give them another chance.
Yeah.
It's what's hard. I keep thinking about when Jesus said, if somebody wants to take your coat, give them your cloak as well. Basically what he's saying is, he's not saying what I said is, oh, I lent you some money, you never paid me back, that's it, we're done. He's not saying that. He's saying, hey, you lent them some money, they did, maybe you need to lend them some more or give them something.
Yeah.
Not a lend, but a gift next time, because maybe that's what's going to release the power of God in their life, because that's really what we're looking for, right?
Yeah.
Again, so unnatural for us.
Very unnatural.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah, and I think kind of to wrap things up, I'm just thinking about people out there who, you're in debt and you don't want to be. I don't know anybody that wants to be in debt, and maybe you feel shame or you feel guilt, and I think Jesus would say, hey, don't do that. Bring that to your Father and say, help me, Father, forgive me for this. And just start doing what you can, and maybe seek out some help or whatever. But I think one of those things that you can do is forgive yourself, and begin to make the changes and to forgive others in those things. That's kind of interesting, because we owe some money on a student loan, and so I was hoping this person would pay us back because we could pay that back. And it's like, okay, well, let me just, Lord, help me to do what I need to do with this loan and to pay it back. Help me, Lord, please forgive me. Help me work towards this being gone. And I'm not going to be dependent on this person. I'm going to be dependent on you for me to pay this back. I think that's an important thing for us to think through. And then the other thing is just, I think someone was just telling me today that they've been working through the message, and they're going to write a letter to this person that they feel like the Lord is saying that they need to forgive, and it's a hard thing. And it was cool because I said, yes, write that letter, 100% write that letter. Whether or not you give that letter to that person, that's a whole nother deal, which may or may not be right, but write that letter. And I think that is somehow you're saying, okay, I'm beginning to take a step towards releasing this. I'm beginning to take a step towards forgiveness. And Lord willing, as Alec was saying, as you take that step, the Spirit of God will come in, and not by might, not by power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord. We can start to have our hearts freed up, because really that's what it's about.
Right.
Forgiveness is a lot less about, whether or not someone else is free. It's just Jesus is saying, no, this is about you being free. You being free to live, to walk. You not being God. Captured or enslaved by anything else. So forgiveness, it's a daily practice, and it can be one of the hardest things in the world. But Tim Keller was a great resource. He wrote a book on forgiveness and actually talks about the kind of secular idea of forgiveness versus the biblical idea of forgiveness, which there's benefits in both, but obviously, one of them has the actual roots in the forgiveness of God and the cross and the Spirit of God and the empowering. So that's what we're talking about over there. But
amen. Good word, David. Good word.
And thank you for listening. Thank you for checking out. Thank you for Dalton for capturing this and putting it on the interwebs so that other people can hopefully benefit from this. And if you are benefiting from this, we'd love to hear any feedback you have for us. If you have questions you'd like us to touch on, then you can get those out there. And if you want to come check out Living Streams Church, we'll be here Sunday morning, Central and Glendale, right at the corner there. And Sunday mornings we'll be here. So we'd love to see you. But with that being said, thank you, Alec. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
And have a good next thing, whatever you're doing.